Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Foresight TV. I've got Dave Schless, the founder, head of American Seniors Housing Association. He's been on before, but it's been way too long. I'm really excited to hear from you, your wisdom, what's going on in the industry. Before we get into our conversation, this. Hey guys, Steve Moran here. Dave, welcome to Foresight TV. I am so excited about this conversation, but just in case somebody doesn't know who you are, let's start with that part. Talk about you, your background, and your passion.
Well, Steve, it's a pleasure to be with you again. Always enjoy visiting with you. I have been involved in the industry really my whole professional career. I started American Seniors Housing Association in 1991. So hard to believe, but this is our 35th anniversary this year. And ASHA was originally started by a group called the National Multifamily Housing Council, which we were part of for about a decade. And then we spun off from NMHC in 2001. So really have spent my whole career, with ASHA in the industry, and our focus has been kind of a few areas, advocacy, particularly federal advocacy, as it relates to senior living communities and operations. Do a lot of research. That is really one of those areas for us that we started. Probably one of the kind of longest running industry studies, the state of seniors housing, back in the early 90s with what was at the time Coopers and Lybrand, now PwC. And then we have meetings, a few meetings a year. And then most recently, we started a consumer education effort called Where You Live Matters, which I know you and I have chatted about in the past. So we're kind of, I describe ASHA, it's a boutique association, not trying to be all things to all people, very focused, kind of a high level group of executives, both for-profit, not-for-profit, and really spanning the whole spectrum of senior living, from active adult, IL, assisted living, memory care, life plan, and everything in between.
So how did you get started in it? I mean, were you a multifamily guy and ended up inheriting it, or something else?
So I have a master's. I have a master's of science degree in long-term care administration. So I went through what was really the strongest program in the country back in the day, and that was at North Texas. It's a master's program, and it had both a thesis component to the master's, and it also had a very extensive internship that you had to do to get the degree. And as it turned out, I had two options. I had one option with Kendall, which is, of course, a very well-regarded not-for-profit at the time in Pennsylvania. And then there was another association at the time that was called NASLI, National Association for Senior Living Industries, and they were in Annapolis, Maryland. And as it turns out, but I have an older brother who has worked at the Pentagon his whole career. So I went with the NASLI internship, which was an organization that was it was really ahead of its time. It was an organization that represented a range of different businesses in the U.S. that were interested in serving older adults. And many of them were, the early players in the senior housing industry. So, I mean, one of the people I met early on was Bill Sheriff from Brookdale, who at the time was with American Retirement Corporation in Tennessee. And I met Mary Leary, and I met Jim Stroud, who was, with Capital Realty Group, which became Capital Senior Living, which is now Sonida Senior Living. So I met a lot of the early, players in the business, and so when the National Multifamily Housing Council was going to start this senior housing committee up, there were several people who recommended me, and Mary Leary certainly was. I always say I would not be where I am were it not for Mary's endorsement of myself to NMHC at the time.
That's a great story. I'd never heard that before. That's super. So here you are. You're a little more mature. You've seen a lot. You've seen some great times, some not so great times. Mostly we seem to be in sort of great times, but my personal observation is that even with occupancy being high, there seems to be sort of a level of, I don't know, nervousness or skittishness. Maybe that's just me. Do you have thoughts on kind of where we're at right now?
Well, again, I think there's a good deal of optimism in a general sense about where the industry is. Obviously, as you know, I mean that COVID era was just really beyond difficult. I think for everyone. I think I do have a little PTSD. It was just awful. So it's the industry's kind of gotten through that. I mean, you're still seeing, I think, some of the maybe finishing or the final touches on some of the workout of that era, and you clearly lost a generation of the development cycle that would have otherwise happened. At the same time, we can all see the demographics, and so I think there's a concern about on the one hand, I think capital markets are enthusiastic about senior living again, which is good. So you see that. By the same token, I think there's a couple of areas that maybe account for the skittishness that you reference. One is certainly the capacity to build new senior living, I think, is still a real challenge, and it's a challenge for a host of reasons. But I think if you talk to someone that has done development in this space or multifamily, really any type of real estate development, you've got real concerns in certain markets about the labor situation in the construction, on the construction side of things. And, again, you've got to, if you're going to develop, you've got to, make these deals pencil out. And I think there's an awareness that, you can't just build, super high end senior living communities. That yes, there's opportunities to build very upscale senior housing, but the industry's got to serve a broader population. So I think those are real issues. At the same time, again, I'm gonna I guess maybe I'm gonna belabor the labor, but the labor is still an issue for this industry, and obviously, again, more of an issue if you're serving a more frail population in your settings than if, for example, you're focusing on the active adult side. But that's an issue that is it's a real issue, and I my personal opinion is it's a crisis it's a crisis that won't resolve itself without policy fixes. And so those are things that I think, there's an awareness of that. And to the extent, as you say, you're sensing, some skittishness, I think with good, with good reason. I think there's that ongoing, concern about labor that, again, over the course of the next, 10, 20, 30 years, without something changing from an immigration perspective, you can see that being a real challenge for everyone, but certainly for our workforce.
So one of the things that I sort of I find myself in kind of a mixed mind on relative to labor is that there are a few people out there who really don't struggle with labor. You look at Rob Leibowitz at Goodwin House is probably my favorite example. I don't know what their current numbers are, but when we talked a few months, they were getting like 900 applications a month because they've really worked on creating this great workplace culture. So people love coming to work. And so I find myself wondering how much of that labor problem we could solve if we spent more time thinking about the workplace culture. Just wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, I first of all, I agree. I mean, I think, I think there's a multitude of pieces to the topic, and there's no question. There are companies that I think are much more advanced, much more thoughtful, much more focused on their workers and reducing the turnover, and so that is absolutely I think it's an imperative for any operator. And it's interesting because we've started to try and capture some of this employee turnover in the state of seniors housing research that I referenced briefly at the outset. And, and we do see, again, we don't have, we're early in the collection of this data, so we don't have a ton of data, but between 2023 and 2024, we definitely see a reduction in employee turnover, and that's a good thing. And that, what does that tell you? That tells you that exactly to the point you're making is that the light bulb has gone off, and that there's an awareness that we've got to do better on all fronts, trying to keep our workers happy, make sure they have opportunities to grow. All of the things that we know people want they're really central to successful operations.
Yeah. So you talk a little bit about policy. You mentioned a little bit immigration. I'd like to have you expand a little bit more on what you're doing in that arena and maybe what other policy areas that you're working on.
So I mean, I will say this. I mean, the immigration issue has been very front and center for us for several years. And we're up on Capitol Hill pretty much every day. We're up on the Hill, and we are focused on both parties. So everything we do on a bipartisan basis. And so for us, I think just kind of the good news is I think we do see an awareness and acknowledgement from both Republicans and Democrats about a lot of these issues and the crisis that, again, we believe is there right now, and the need to do something about it. The big issue for us, Steve, is we would like to see the creation of a new visa category that works for our workforce, because right now, you've got some visa programs out there that they work for agriculture, which is they're temporary. You've got a visa category, again, also temporary, but utilized by hospitality. And we have a need, I believe, very strongly for a specific category that works for our workers, caregivers, other frontline positions. So that would really be the ideal for us. And there's some bipartisan legislation out there that has been introduced, and we're very supportive of it for essential workers, which our folks are essential workers. But it's a complicated issue, and I will add this. I mean, it's a complicated issue on both sides of the aisle, which surprises people sometimes. And they say, well, if we could just get the Republicans to do something about this, it's easy, we'll get it done. It's complicated. It's a complicated issue for both parties, and I will tell you, I would say it's probably as complicated on the Democratic side as it is on the Republican side. I would say the positive is that we have seen an acknowledgement in both parties on this issue. If you're a member of Congress, you are hearing from probably virtually everyone that comes into your office is talking about labor and workforce, and that's just the reality. Now, when we get to when we're at a place politically to address some of that, that will be great. We're clearly not at that. We're clearly not at that place right now.
So, are there things that operators, leaders should be doing to help move this forward?
Again, we've encouraged our members to reach out to their elected officials, and again, it's a for some it's a sensitive issue, but we've been very front and center about the need to talk to your elected officials, and again, both Republicans and Democrats. It's an issue obviously that affects skilled nursing, home care, our sector, hospitals. I mean, it's a real big problem that, again, given all of the demographics, including birth rates, et cetera, it's not going to. I don't believe it fixes itself. I know that there are some folks. I'm not sure I'm in this camp yet, but I know there are some folks that believe that over the course of the next 5 years, you'll start to see humanoid robots playing a role in some of this. I don't know. I mean, I think that remains to be seen, but I do think it's a crisis that on its own does not resolve itself without.
Yeah, I'm kind of in your camp on the humanoid robot thing. It's hard for me to imagine that we can do that, and it's not just the mechanics; it's also the human interaction, right? So,
absolutely.
And frankly, we're not very far along with the robots in our industry for even simpler things like floor cleaning and
Right.
dining services. So we've got a ways to go. Jada, can you pull that comment back up? Dorsey asked a really good question. Are you seeing particular operators who are really getting it right? I named one that I know is, maybe you're not comfortable naming, but maybe even you could just talk about the ones who are having some success on this, what some of the things that they're doing.
Well, I think there's a number of, and I'm not even sure I know all of it, but I think there's a number of companies that are, doing a really nice job. I mean, certainly Trilogy Health Services out of Louisville, Kentucky, does a lot of really good things. I think a lot of companies do. Northbridge up in Massachusetts, very very thoughtful. But I see this across the country. I mean, I think there's just such an awareness. I think the industry's talked about this. And so I don't think it's isolated to just a few operators. I mean, I think there's an awareness and a lot of action taking place across the country, from the Pacific Northwest to the Midwest. I think everybody is aware of the need to really provide opportunities for our existing team members to grow, to mentor, and to really focus on the workforce, so that you're not replacing 25% of your staff every quarter or whatever it is. I mean, that the lost productivity that's spent retraining new workers, it's debilitating and it's costly. And I think the industry is painfully aware of that at this point.
So I like to talk a little bit about affordability. As you likely know, I'm a caregiver for my stepfather who lives in senior living, and he's in a small home. It's very, very expensive. He's got substantial net worth, so cost is not, I can pay for whatever he needs and he'll be fine. But as I go visit him and as I write those checks for him and I think about it, I think how much work that it takes to provide care for him in that community. I just, the idea that we would have, if he didn't have those financial resources, we'd be forced to do it here at home is just really, really scary. And I know that rates in senior living have been going up faster than inflation, not particularly because people are getting rich off of it, but because just the particular costs that we have are going up. And do you see any solutions? Do you see any policy solutions to solve that problem?
I mean, again, I think I think we have in general a housing affordability issue in the U.S. So I'm not the senior housing side is part of a bigger housing affordability issue. And you're starting to see some conversations about some of the things that, could probably be helpful in terms of, reducing the cost of, new construction. And at the end of the day, the answer ultimately is you've got to, part of the solution is to, produce more housing units, whether that's, multifamily, single family, independent living, assisted living. I mean, that's just part of it. Unfortunately, as we discussed before, I mean, the development side, it has gotten more challenging, not less challenging. And, to some extent, I think the reduced capital costs, so as the interest rates have, ticked down a bit, that's good news. But I think the benefits of the lower cost of capital probably offset by the labor issues that I think are very significant in the world of construction and exacerbated by ICE raids on construction sites and things of that nature. Beyond that, finding federal dollars to provide some subsidization of services for older adults who don't have the resources. I mean, I think that is the needed solution. Obviously, like anyone, when you follow the CBO just put a report out the other day, actually, and what you can see is, again, the entitlement programs straining the federal budget. So again, I'm not that I'm not optimistic, but you can just see the government. The government's going to have to resolve Social Security, Medicare, obviously there's a lot going on in the world of Medicaid, but I think that's the answer is you've got to find some policy solutions. on the margin, I think with some changes, you could probably make it easier to develop for, there's some savings there. I do think there's some savings there on the production side, on the development side, but ultimately, that's probably you're going to need to find some subsidies. I also will say this: I believe that there are other solutions that will be developed. I happen to be a big proponent, and at some point we'll, I think, really start to see it. The PACE programs, or even if it's not a formal PACE program, but using home care. I'm sorry, using adult daycare in concert with senior living community. I think there's a lot of reason to believe we'll see that happen. And I am also, again, just generally optimistic. I think, that there is such an awareness of the needs and the opportunity associated with providing more housing opportunities for people with less means, that we will see some innovation. I think you'll see some capital players innovating in that space, and that'll be very welcome.
Yeah, I'm very optimistic. I think people are spending a lot more time sort of just thinking about new and better creative ways to serve older populations, to serve team members. Are you seeing anybody out there just, who are building or who are developing where you're going, oh man, that's really cool, that really gets you excited?
I mean, I think there's a lot of, a lot of newer development that is really, that when you walk into the communities, it delights me because, you've seen, I've seen, and I think you've seen it too, the evolution of, senior housing over the course of the past 30, 35 years. I have. And so, I walk into some of the newer senior living buildings, and you would not, if somebody said, well, this is what assisted, if somebody said to me, 30 years ago that this is assisted living, I wouldn't have believed it, because it looks like a really lovely residential contemporary environment. And so I see that in a lot of the newer, product, be it, continuing care, but not just continuing care. I see it in independent living and assisted living and memory care. And that's wonderful to see. We've kind of moved into, taking the best of multifamily, the best of hospitality, and we're building really much more appealing senior housing. And, SRG, Senior Resource Group, has built some terrific, properties. Kisco's done a great job. There's Brightview has consistently built terrific communities, and even some of the rehabs of some of these older properties that have been acquired, and really impressive. What I've seen.
Last week, I was in Southern California for a conference, and I got a chance to tour a building that's under construction, be open in sometime in the next 6 or so months, and then one that's very close by that's already open, a Momentum building. And they were spectacular. And one of the things I really liked about both these buildings is they look a lot more like life before senior living. The Momentum building I was in, they've got a full service bar that opens at noon. And it's a charge bar, so you pay extra for it. And the only real difference between it's sort of a market rate bar is they do close at 8 o'clock because the population is typically gone by then. And so I'm very, very encouraged by that. So we're about out of time, but I actually have one more question for you that I'm sort of starting to think about, and maybe I shouldn't because it won't be. By the time the problem occurs, I'll be old enough that I'll be living in senior living. But as I drive around my Sacramento here, I'm really struck by the number of senior living communities I drive by every day. And so I can remember when I first started Foresight about 15 years ago, there was all this talk about the coming baby boomer wave that was going to make everything better. We're kind of in the early stages, but we're kind of in the middle of that. And then I'm starting to realize that, in another 20 years, this baby boomer is, instead of going like that, is going to start like that. Any thoughts on what's going to happen with all those buildings? I mean, will we figure out what to do with them? Is there really going to be enough need? Maybe it'll be more popular.
Well, I have a couple thoughts. I mean, certainly, I think there's a lifespan for some of these properties, and some of them, yes, you can, put money into, and there may be alternative uses, but I think there's a demand. There's going to be a need for senior housing. Some of the older product probably will be part of the solution for, serving, folks of less affluence. As you probably know, I've been very involved over the years with the Alzheimer's Association. And so I am, eternally grateful to the work they do and the funding that they've advocated for. My strong belief is that, we are going to have, viable treatments for Alzheimer's and probably other dementias. And that might be the piece of the senior housing stock that you have to really, figure out, how do we repurpose this? What's an alternative use for, a standalone memory care setting? I believe that is I believe that's on the horizon.
Yep. I mean, it's really, it's such an exciting time to be in senior living. I think that every day I see people, I love the passion of the leaders in the industry to make it better. I love your passion for the industry, for the legislative piece of it. I've got another long list of questions. I guess we could probably go another hour. Unfortunately, we're out of time.
Well, anytime, Steve. I love chatting with you, and I appreciate your work because I think you've really helped advance the industry. So, thank you for having me. And any time you want to pick this up, I would love to do it.
Great. I appreciate that. And I want to say thanks to Jada. Too often I forget to say thanks for producing in the background. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great weekend. Dave, hang on for just a minute after we're off the air and for a quick debrief.